June 6, 1944, 03:30 hours. Saint-Omer Airfield, northern France. Oberst Johannes Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, studied the intelligence reports with growing disbelief. Allied convoy movements indicated the invasion would begin within hours, yet the Luftwaffe's entire fighter strength in France had been reduced to exactly 2 operational aircraft, 2 Focke-Wulf 190s, against what German intelligence estimated as over 11,000 Allied aircraft. As Priller prepared for what he knew would be a suicide mission, he couldn't comprehend how German air power had collapsed so completely. What he didn't understand was that 300 miles away, across the English Channel, 516 North American P-51 Mustangs were preparing to ensure that German air interference with the invasion would be virtually impossible. These sleek, silver fighters represented more than just superior aircraft. They embodied the strategic transformation that had given the Allies absolute air superiority over Hitler's fortress Europe. The mathematics were overwhelming. While Germany scraped together a handful of fighters for the most critical day of the war, America alone was deploying more long-range escort fighters than the Luftwaffe had operational aircraft in all of Western Europe. The crisis that would consume German air power had begun exactly 18 months earlier. On January 27, 1943, the US 8th Air Force had attempted its first raid on Germany itself, targeting the submarine yards at Wilhelmshaven with 64 B-17 flying fortresses. The bombers, flying without escort beyond the North Sea, had suffered devastating losses. 7 bombers destroyed, dozens damaged, crews killed or captured. More critically, the raid had demonstrated the fatal limitation of American strategic bombing doctrine. No escort fighter possessed the range to accompany bombers to targets deep inside Germany. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, faced an impossible equation. Bombers operating without escort suffered prohibitive losses, but no Allied fighter could reach Berlin and return. The P-47 Thunderbolt, America's primary escort fighter, had a combat radius of only 425 miles. The Spitfire, brilliant in defensive operations, managed barely 300 miles. German targets lay 600 to 800 miles from English bases. The Luftwaffe, understanding this limitation, had developed tactics specifically to exploit it. They would allow Allied escorts to reach their maximum range, then attack the bombers during their most vulnerable phase, the deep penetration when no friendly fighters could assist. Colonel Adolf Galland, commanding the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, had calculated that sustaining 100 bomber losses per mission would force the Americans to abandon daylight strategic bombing entirely. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. Each B-17 required 10 highly trained crew members and represented months of specialized production. The Luftwaffe could trade fighters 1-for-1 with bombers and win through simple arithmetic. What Galland couldn't foresee was that American industry was already solving the range problem with a fighter that would transform aerial warfare completely. The North American P-51 Mustang had begun as a desperate improvisation. In April 1940, with Britain facing invasion, the Royal Air Force had approached North American Aviation requesting immediate production of Curtiss P-40 fighters under license. Edgar Schmood, North American's chief designer, had proposed something radical. Rather than build obsolete P-40s, why not design an entirely new fighter in the same time frame? The result was the NA-73X prototype, which first flew on October 26, 1940, just 102 days after the initial contract signing. Early P-51s powered by Allison engines had proven adequate for ground attack, but disappointing at high altitude where bomber escort was needed. The transformation came through British innovation. Rolls-Royce engineers had mated the Mustang airframe with their superb Merlin engine, creating the P-51B variant that would revolutionize air warfare. The Packard-built Merlin V1650-7 engine delivered 1,695 horsepower and maintained full power output to 30,000 feet. Combined with the Mustang's exceptionally clean aerodynamics and massive internal fuel capacity, this created a fighter with unprecedented range. With external drop tanks, the P-51B could escort bombers 850 miles from base, fight at maximum performance when they arrived, and return home with fuel remaining. In December 1943, the first P-51Bs had arrived in England with the 354th Fighter Group. Colonel Kenneth Martin, the group commander, understood immediately that he commanded a weapon that would change everything. "These aren't just better fighters," he told his pilots. "They're war winners. For the first time, we can take the fight to the Germans anywhere they fly." The Luftwaffe's first encounter with long-range Mustangs had come as a devastating shock. On December 13, 1943, P-51s had appeared over Kiel, 480 miles from their English bases, escorting B-17s attacking submarine construction yards. German fighter controllers, monitoring the raiders' approach, had calculated that no Allied escorts could reach this target. When Silver Mustangs suddenly attacked Focke-Wulf 190s attempting to intercept the bombers, German pilots found themselves facing not just superior aircraft, but the collapse of their entire strategic position. Oberst Egon Meyer, one of Germany's most successful fighter aces with 102 victories, had been among the first to recognize the implications. In his final combat report, filed hours before his death in February 1944, Meyer had written with clinical precision, "The American long-range fighter changes everything. We can no longer mass forces against bomber formations because escorts appear at any altitude, any distance. Our advantage is lost. We are no longer hunters. We have become the hunted." By March 1944, P-51 production had reached industrial scale that defied German comprehension. North American Aviation's Inglewood plant was completing 15 Mustangs daily. The new Dallas facility added another 10 aircraft per day. Total monthly production exceeded 500 aircraft, more P-51s than the Luftwaffe possessed operational fighters of all types on the Western Front. Each Mustang represented sophisticated engineering that German industry, increasingly dependent on slave labor and dispersed underground facilities, could no longer match. The Merlin engine required precision manufacturing tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The laminar flow wing demanded surface smoothness impossible to achieve in bombed-out German factories. The advanced navigation and communication equipment exceeded anything German fighters carried. American quality control rejected aircraft that German standards would have accepted eagerly. The strategic impact became clear during Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, when the 8th and 15th Air Forces had launched coordinated attacks on German aircraft production. Over 3,500 bomber sorties, escorted by long-range P-51s, had struck targets across Germany. The Luftwaffe, forced to defend its aircraft factories, had committed every available fighter. The results were catastrophic for German air power. The Americans had lost 226 bombers and 28 fighters. But the Luftwaffe had suffered irreplaceable losses. Over 450 fighter aircraft destroyed, including 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland had reported to Hermann Göring that Germany was now losing 400 fighters monthly while producing 300. The arithmetic of defeat was becoming undeniable. The P-51 escort groups weren't just protecting bombers. They were systematically destroying the Luftwaffe through sustained combat. Major Pierce McKinnon, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had witnessed this transformation firsthand. In February 1943, his unit flying P-47 Thunderbolts had watched helplessly as German fighters slaughtered bombers beyond escort range. By February 1944, flying P-51 Mustangs, his pilots were shooting down German fighters over Berlin itself. The psychological impact was devastating to German morale. McKinnon later wrote, We weren't just escorting bombers anymore. We were hunting German fighters in their own backyard, forcing them to fight on our terms, at our altitude, at our speed. They went from predators to prey in 6 months. The technology advantage was overwhelming. While German pilots flew aircraft with 20mm cannon, but limited ammunition, P-51 pilots enjoyed 6.50 caliber machine guns, with 1,840 rounds total. The sustained firepower advantage was decisive in combat. German pilots had to achieve kills with brief bursts of cannon fire. American pilots could maintain fire for over a minute if necessary. Lieutenant Colonel John Landers, commanding the 78th Fighter Group, had explained the tactical revolution to his pilots. German fighters can't turn with us, can't climb with us above 25,000 feet, can't outrun us, and can't match our firepower. The only advantage they retain is experience, and we're killing the experienced pilots faster than they can train replacements. By April 1944, P-51 range had extended even further with improved drop tank designs. The 108-gallon wing tanks allowed Mustangs to escort bombers to any target in Germany and still possess fuel for extended combat. The strategic bombing campaign, previously limited to targets within 400 miles of England, could now reach every military installation in the Reich. Colonel Donald Blakesley, the legendary commander of the 4th Fighter Group, had articulated the transformation perfectly. In 1943, the Luftwaffe decided when and where we fought. In 1944, we decide they can run, but they can't hide. Every airfield, every factory, every oil refinery is within our reach now. German intelligence had tracked American P-51 deployments with growing alarm. By May 1944, the 8th Air Force operated 14 fighter groups, most equipped with Mustangs. The 15th Air Force in Italy added another 5 P-51 groups. Combined strength exceeded 1,500 long-range fighters. General der Flieger Adolf Galland had calculated that Germany needed 4,000 fighters to defend against this force effectively. Germany possessed fewer than 1,000 operational fighters on all fronts combined. The mathematics were irrefutable. German air power faced annihilation through simple arithmetic. Fuel shortages compounded the crisis. By spring 1944, Allied bombing had reduced German aviation fuel production by 80%. Luftwaffe pilots received 30 hours flight training compared to 400 hours for American pilots. New German pilots arrived at combat units barely capable of takeoff and landing, let alone aerial combat against veterans flying superior aircraft. The climactic demonstration of American air superiority had come during the week preceding D-Day. Operation Neptune, the air plan for the invasion, called for 11,590 Allied aircraft to support the landings. This included 5,510 fighters, over half of them long-range P-51 Mustangs capable of maintaining continuous air cover over the beaches and far inland. The Luftwaffe's response revealed the completeness of their collapse. Luftflotte 3, responsible for defending France, possessed exactly 319 operational aircraft. Of these, only 124 were single-engine fighters. The remainder were reconnaissance aircraft, night fighters, and obsolete bombers. The force ratio was 36-1 in favor of the Allies. Such numerical superiority guaranteed that German air interference with the invasion would be negligible. General Dwight Eisenhower, reviewing the air situation on June 5th, had received a briefing that would have seemed impossible just 18 months earlier. The Luftwaffe possessed insufficient strength to mount meaningful opposition to the landings. Allied air forces would operate with virtual immunity. The strategic bombing campaign had destroyed German aircraft production, pilot training capabilities, and fuel supplies. Most critically, the P-51 Mustang had eliminated Germany's last advantage, the ability to choose when and where to fight. As Eisenhower prepared to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history, He possessed something no previous invasion commander had enjoyed: absolute air superiority. The dawn of June 6 brought this superiority into sharp focus. As 516 P-51 Mustangs took off from English airfields to cover the invasion, German fighter controllers could only watch helplessly. Oberst Priller and his wingman, the only Luftwaffe pilots to reach the beaches that morning, found themselves flying into an impenetrable wall of Allied aircraft. Their brief strafing run against the landing zones was more symbolic than strategic. Within minutes, they were fleeing westward, pursued by Mustangs that could have caught them easily had pilots chosen to abandon their assigned patrol areas. The psychological impact on German ground forces was immediate and demoralizing. Soldiers who had been promised air support watched Allied fighters dominate the skies without challenge. The Wehrmacht, accustomed to Luftwaffe superiority in previous campaigns, now operated under constant air attack with no protection from their own aircraft. Colonel Johannes Steinhoff, one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders, had arrived at Saint-Omer that morning expecting to lead his squadron against the invasion. Instead, he found empty hangars and skeletal ground crews. His pilots had been transferred, his aircraft relocated, his unit effectively disbanded due to fuel shortages and pilot losses. Steinhoff later wrote, "We had been magnificent hunters in 1940. By June 1944, we were extinct as a fighting force. The Americans hadn't just defeated us, they had made us irrelevant. The technical specifications told the story of American superiority clearly. The P-51D, the variant most commonly deployed on D-Day, represented engineering excellence that German industry could no longer match. Maximum speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet exceeded the performance of any German fighter in service. Service ceiling of 41,900 feet allowed Mustangs to attack from altitudes where German fighters struggled to climb. Combat radius of 850 miles with drop tanks provided range that made no German target safe from escort. The armament package of 6.50 caliber machine guns with 1,840 rounds total delivered sustained firepower that German cannon-armed fighters couldn't match. American pilots could maintain fire for extended periods, while German pilots faced ammunition limitations that forced precise shooting under combat stress. More importantly, the reliability was superior. P-51s achieved operational availability rates exceeding 80% compared to German rates below 60%. American fighters completed missions that German aircraft couldn't attempt due to mechanical failures. The industrial support structure was equally overwhelming. Each P-51 unit received regular supplies of spare parts, replacement engines, and technical upgrades. German units struggled to maintain any operational aircraft with severely limited spare parts and improvised repairs. The pilot training disparity had become critical by June 1944. American P-51 pilots arrived in combat units with 400 hours total flight time, including 75 hours in advanced fighters. They had practiced formation flying, instrument navigation, air-to-air gunnery, and tactical procedures. German pilots, when available, reached combat units with less than 100 hours total time and minimal combat training. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, commanding the 353rd Fighter Group, had described the training advantage succinctly. "Our new pilots arrive better trained than German veterans. They know their aircraft intimately, understand tactics thoroughly, and can execute complex missions independently. German pilots seem to be learning to fight while they're fighting. It's not a fair contest." The fuel situation revealed the completeness of German defeat. Each P-51 on D-Day carried 489 gallons of fuel internally, with external tanks adding another 216 gallons. This 705-gallon capacity allowed 6 hours of flight time or 4 hours with significant combat maneuvering. German fighters, when they had fuel at all, operated on severely restricted allocations. Focke-Wulf 190S carried 115 gallons internally, sufficient for 90 minutes of flight, including minimal combat time. The strategic implications were devastating. American fighters could patrol continuously over the invasion zone, while German fighters, if they appeared at all, could remain on station for mere minutes before fuel concerns forced their withdrawal. Navigation technology provided another decisive advantage. P-51s operated with advanced radio navigation systems, comprehensive maps, and detailed briefings. Formation leaders received precise coordinates for patrol areas, rendezvous points, and emergency fields. German pilots, operating with limited radio equipment and outdated maps, struggled to find targets or coordinate with other units. Many German sorties failed to locate their intended targets simply due to navigation failures. The maintenance revolution was equally significant. American ground crews had developed procedures that kept fighters operational under combat conditions. Engine changes that required days in German units were completed in hours by American mechanics. Damaged aircraft that Germans would abandon were repaired and returned to service overnight. The logistics train supporting P-51 operations included dedicated supply ships, trained maintenance personnel, and comprehensive spare parts inventories that dwarfed anything available to German units. Weather operations demonstrated American technical superiority. P-51s carried sophisticated instruments that allowed formation flying in clouds and navigation through weather that grounded German fighters. The instrument landing systems at English bases permitted operations in fog and rain that would halt Luftwaffe activities completely. This all-weather capability meant that Allied air superiority was constant rather than dependent on favorable conditions. The communication systems created unprecedented coordination. Each P-51 carried radio equipment that maintained contact with ground controllers, bomber formations, and other fighter units simultaneously. The clarity and range exceeded anything German fighters possessed. Formation leaders could coordinate complex tactical movements, receive target updates, and respond to threats in real time. German pilots, when they had functioning radios at all, operated with limited communication that prevented effective coordination. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, had witnessed the complete transformation of air warfare between 1943 and 1944. In January 1943, German fighters attacked our bombers with impunity beyond escort range. By June 1944, German fighters couldn't reach our bombers anywhere because we had fighters everywhere. The P-51 didn't just solve the escort problem. It eliminated German air power as a strategic factor. The tactical employment of P-51s on D-Day revealed sophisticated understanding of air superiority operations. Rather than simply escorting bombers, Mustang formations maintained continuous air patrols over the invasion zone. These fighter sweeps intercepted any German aircraft attempting to reach the beaches while providing immediate support for ground forces. The patrol patterns overlapped to ensure no gaps existed where German fighters might penetrate. Advanced radar warning systems allowed P-51 formations to vector toward any German aircraft approaching the invasion zone. Ground controllers monitored Luftwaffe radio traffic and directed interceptors with precision that made German surprise attacks impossible. The few German pilots who attempted to reach the beaches found themselves facing superior forces positioned to intercept them before they could effect the landings. The results were predictable. Of the 319 aircraft the Luftwaffe possessed in France on June 6th, only 26 attempted sorties against the invasion. Of these, 24 failed to reach their targets due to interception by Allied fighters or mechanical failures. The two aircraft that did reach the beaches, Priller's Focke-Wulf 190s, conducted a brief strafing run before withdrawing under pressure from pursuing Mustangs. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, described the combat environment that morning. "We owned the sky completely. German fighters were so rare that seeing one was noteworthy. Most of our pilots flew patrol missions without encountering any enemy aircraft at all. The Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force over France. This air superiority enabled close air support that revolutionized ground combat. P-51 formations, when not engaged in escort duties or air patrols, conducted ground attack missions against German strongpoints threatening the landings. Their 6 machine guns and provision for bombs or rockets provided precise fire support that German ground forces couldn't counter. The psychological impact was devastating to German morale and crucial for Allied confidence. German generals attempting to coordinate defensive operations found their communications under constant air attack. Staff cars, command posts, and communication centers became priority targets for roving P-51 formations. The Wehrmacht's response time to developing threats slowed dramatically as commanders feared to move during daylight hours. This paralysis of German command and control was perhaps more valuable than the direct military damage inflicted by air attacks. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B defending the Atlantic Wall, had understood the implications of air superiority months before the invasion. In a report to Hitler dated April 22, 1944, Rommel had written with characteristic bluntness, "The enemy's overwhelming air superiority makes any movement during daylight hours extremely hazardous. Our forces cannot respond to threats rapidly because vehicles and personnel are destroyed when they attempt to move. This is not a tactical problem but a strategic catastrophe." The intelligence dimension of air superiority proved equally critical. P-51 formations conducted reconnaissance missions that provided detailed information about German defensive positions, troop movements, and fortifications. Photo reconnaissance. Mustangs, stripped of armament and carrying cameras, operated with impunity over German-held territory. German forces found concealment nearly impossible with constant aerial observation. This intelligence advantage allowed Allied planners to adjust invasion plans based on current German dispositions rather than estimates. The precision of Allied naval gunfire and bomber attacks resulted partly from accurate targeting information provided by reconnaissance Mustangs operating over the beaches during the invasion itself. Luftwaffe. Intelligence analysis, captured after the war, revealed the completeness of their strategic defeat. A report dated June 10, 1944, 4 days after the invasion, concluded with stark honesty. The enemy operates approximately 15,000 aircraft against our 2,000. In fighter aircraft, the disparity is 6,000 to 800. More critically, enemy fighter aircraft possess range and performance that makes our defensive strategy impossible. We cannot concentrate forces because escorts appear at every altitude and location. Our training system cannot replace losses. Our fuel supplies cannot sustain operations. The Luftwaffe has ceased to be an effective fighting force in the West. General der Flieger. Adolf Galland's final assessment, delivered to Hermann Göring in July 1944, provided the epitaph for German air power. The American P-51 has eliminated our last strategic advantage, the ability to choose when and where to fight. They can escort bombers to any target while maintaining sufficient strength to dominate local airspace. Our fighters, when available, operate at such disadvantage in numbers, training, and fuel that successful operations have become impossible. The war in the air is lost beyond recovery. By August 1944, the strategic implications were undeniable. P-51 formations roamed over Germany at will, attacking aircraft factories, oil refineries, and training facilities. The Luftwaffe's ability to interfere with Allied ground operations had been eliminated completely. German fighter production, despite desperate efforts to increase output, could not replace losses inflicted by superior Allied aircraft flown by better trained pilots. The pilot training crisis had become irreversible. German flying schools, under constant attack by long-range escorts, operated sporadically with severely reduced training hours. New pilots arrived at combat units with insufficient skills to survive against experienced Allied pilots flying superior aircraft. The loss rate among replacement pilots exceeded 80% within their first 10 combat missions. Veteran German pilots, the backbone of the Luftwaffe's effectiveness, had been killed or captured at rates that made their experience irreplaceable. The technological gap widened continuously. While American factories produced P-51s with the latest improvements, German aircraft relied increasingly on substitute materials and slave labor that reduced quality dramatically. Navigation equipment, radios, and engines that functioned reliably in Allied aircraft failed regularly in German fighters. The industrial support necessary for sustained air operations had been systematically destroyed by strategic bombing. Major Pierce McKinnon, reflecting on the transformation between 1943 and 1944, captured the significance perfectly. In 1943, we were defending bombers within 400 miles of England against a competent enemy air force. In 1944, we were attacking targets inside Germany with virtual immunity while the Luftwaffe watched helplessly. The P-51 Mustang was the weapon that made this transformation possible. On D-Day, as 516 Mustangs provided air cover for the largest invasion in history, the circle was complete. American industrial capacity had produced a fighter with sufficient range to escort bombers anywhere in Europe. This strategic capability had systematically destroyed German air power through sustained combat. By June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe possessed insufficient strength to interfere meaningfully with Allied operations. The numerical comparison was stark and decisive. Allied air forces deployed 11,590 aircraft for the invasion, including 5,510 fighters. The Luftwaffe opposed them with 319 aircraft, of which only 124 were single-engine fighters. The force ratio of 36-1 guaranteed that German air interference would be negligible. More significantly, the quality gap was equally overwhelming. Allied pilots averaged 400 hours training in advanced aircraft. German pilots, when available, possessed less than 100 hours total experience. Allied aircraft operated with unlimited fuel, spare parts, and maintenance support. German aircraft suffered from fuel shortages, substitute materials, and improvised repairs. The technological advantages were cumulative and decisive. Colonel Donald Blakesley, whose 4th Fighter Group had destroyed more German aircraft than any other unit, summarized the achievement succinctly. "We didn't just win air superiority. We eliminated the Luftwaffe as a strategic factor." By D-Day, German fighters were so rare that young pilots had never seen one. The P-51 Mustang was the weapon that made this possible. But the real victory was American industrial capacity that produced 15,000 of these fighters, while Germany struggled to build 1,000 aircraft of all types. The strategic bombing campaign, made possible by long-range escort fighters, had eliminated German aircraft production, pilot training, and fuel supplies simultaneously. This systematic destruction created a cascade of failures that made German air power recovery impossible. Each destroyed aircraft factory reduced production capacity. Each attacked fuel facility limited training hours. Each killed pilot eliminated irreplaceable experience. The cumulative effect was the collapse of German air power as an effective fighting force. The implications extended beyond the immediate military situation. Air superiority enabled the success of D-Day, which opened the second front that divided German forces and accelerated their defeat. The strategic bombing campaign, protected by long-range escorts, destroyed German industrial capacity and shortened the war significantly. The pilot training advantage that emerged from sustained combat experience gave Allied air forces overwhelming superiority that Germany could never overcome with existing resources. The P-51 Mustang had achieved something unprecedented in military history. A single weapon system had eliminated an entire enemy's strategic capability through superior performance and industrial-scale production. As the sun set on June 6, 1944, the significance was clear to both sides. Oberst Johannes Priller, one of only 2 German pilots to reach the invasion beaches, landed his damaged Focke-Wulf 190, knowing that he had witnessed the end of German air power. His brief strafing run against Allied shipping was more symbolic than strategic, a gesture of defiance rather than effective resistance. The Luftwaffe that had dominated European skies from 1939 to 1942 had been systematically destroyed by American long-range fighters, an industrial capacity that Germany could not match or counter. The air battle for D-Day was won before the first Allied soldier touched French soil, decided by 516 P-51 Mustangs that represented American air superiority so complete that German resistance had become irrelevant. The individual stories of the pilots who flew those 516 P-51 Mustangs on D-Day revealed the human dimension of this technological triumph. Captain Don Gentile, the ace pilot from Piqua, Ohio, who had shot down 21 German aircraft by June 1944, led his squadron over Omaha Beach at 0600 hours that morning. His wingman, Lieutenant John Godfrey, had grown up in a small farming town in Massachusetts, dreaming of flight while working in his father's hardware store. Now he commanded a weapon system worth $51,000, more than most American families earned in 5 years, carrying enough firepower to destroy a German infantry company. These men represented the democratic mobilization that German ideology claimed was impossible. Working-class Americans, immigrant sons, farm boys from the Midwest, all flying the most sophisticated fighter aircraft in the world. The technical specifications that made their success possible told a story of American engineering excellence that German designers could no longer match. Each P-51D Mustang weighed 12,100 pounds fully loaded, nearly double the weight of early warfighters, yet achieved speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour. The Packard 5 1650-7 Merlin engine produced 1,720 horsepower, using 150-octane aviation fuel that American refineries had perfected, while German synthetic fuel plants struggled to produce 87-octane substitutes. The 6 A&M 2.50 caliber machine guns fired at a combined rate of 4,200 rounds per minute, creating a cone of destruction that could disintegrate enemy aircraft in seconds. German pilots, who survived encounters with P-51s, consistently reported the terrifying effectiveness of concentrated .50 caliber fire. Major John Landers, commanding the 78th Fighter Group, had witnessed the complete evolution of American air superiority during his 2 combat tours. In 1943, flying P-47 Thunderbolts, he had been forced to turn back at the German border while bombers continued unescorted into the heart of the Reich. By June 1944, flying P-51 Mustangs, he was leading fighter sweeps over Berlin itself, hunting German aircraft in their own airspace. The transformation was so complete that Landers later wrote, "We went from being limited to coastal defense to owning the entire European sky in 18 months. The P-51 didn't just change tactics, it changed the nature of warfare itself. Air superiority became air supremacy, and air supremacy became air domination. The production statistics behind this transformation defied every assumption about wartime manufacturing. North American aviation had delivered 15,486 P-51 Mustangs by war's end, representing more advanced fighter aircraft than Germany, Japan, and Italy produced combined throughout the entire conflict. Each aircraft required 25,000 individual parts, manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The laminar flow wing alone demanded precision surface finishing that German factories, increasingly reliant on slave labor, could not achieve. The engine, transmission, propeller, armament, radio, navigation, and control systems all represented cutting-edge technology that required skilled workers operating sophisticated machinery. Behind every pilot was an industrial ecosystem that German planners had never imagined possible. The Packard Motor Car Company had converted automobile production lines to manufacture Merlin engines, producing 55,865 units with quality control that exceeded Rolls-Royce standards. Each engine required 3,240 individual components, including supercharger impellers, machined to tolerances of 0.0005 inches. The precision was so demanding that Packard engineers developed new quality control methods that revolutionized American manufacturing. Workers who had built luxury automobiles before the war now produced engines more complex than anything in German aircraft. The ammunition production supporting these fighters represented another marvel of American industrial capacity. Each P-51 carried 1,840 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, with each round manufactured to specifications requiring 15 individual components. The Lake City Arsenal alone produced 10.5 billion rounds of small arms ammunition during the war, more than enough to supply every P-51 sortie with full ammunition loads. The cartridge cases were drawn from brass, manufactured in Connecticut, the bullets cast from lead mined in Missouri, the powder mixed in Tennessee, all coordinated through a supply system that operated with precision German logistics officers found incomprehensible. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, who had survived the famous encounter where his P-47 absorbed over 200 bullet hits, had transitioned to P-51s and experienced firsthand the technological revolution in American aviation. The difference wasn't just performance, he explained to military historians after the war. It was confidence. In the P-47, we knew we could take punishment. In the P-51, we knew we could outfight anything in the sky. The psychological impact on German pilots was immediate. They went from hunting bomber formations to fleeing from escort fighters that could match them in speed, exceed them in range, and overwhelm them in numbers. The fuel supply system supporting P-51 operations on D-Day represented logistics planning on a scale that dwarfed any previous military operation. Each Mustang consumed 105 gallons per hour at cruise power, requiring 28,000 gallons of aviation fuel just for the D-Day morning patrols. The petroleum arrived through a supply chain that stretched from Texas oil fields to English airfields, involving 47 tanker ships, 12 refineries, and 234 fuel trucks. American quartermasters calculated fuel requirements 6 months in advance, ensuring that shortage never limited operations. German units, by contrast, operated on fuel allocations measured in hours of flight time rather than operational requirements. The maintenance revolution that kept P-51s operational exceeded German capabilities by orders of magnitude. American ground crews had developed procedures that allowed complete engine changes in 4 hours compared to German standards requiring 2 days. The precision was possible because American manufacturing standardized components to tolerances that made parts completely interchangeable. A propeller manufactured in Ohio fitted perfectly on an engine built in Michigan, installed in an airframe assembled in California. German aircraft, increasingly built by slave laborers in dispersed facilities, required individual fitting and adjustment that slowed maintenance dramatically. Weather operations demonstrated another dimension of American technological superiority that German forces couldn't match. P-51s carried sophisticated instrument packages that allowed formation flying in clouds and navigation through weather that would ground German fighters completely. The radio compass, artificial horizon, and instrument landing systems enabled operations in conditions that halted Luftwaffe activities. This all-weather capability meant that Allied air superiority was constant rather than dependent on favorable conditions, a strategic advantage that German planners had never anticipated. The communication systems linking P-51 formations created coordination possibilities that revolutionized air warfare. Each aircraft carried VHF radio equipment with crystal-controlled frequency stability and 50-watt transmission power. Formation leaders could coordinate complex tactical movements, receive real-time intelligence updates, and respond to threats with precision that German pilots found impossible to counter. The clarity and range exceeded anything available to German forces, while Luftwaffe pilots struggled with amplitude modulation radios that picked up engine noise and electrical interference. American pilots enjoyed frequency modulation clarity that cut through battlefield chaos. Colonel Hub Zemke, whose 56th Fighter Group had achieved more aerial victories than any other P-47 unit before converting to P-51s, described the tactical revolution succinctly. In 1943, we were defending a narrow corridor 400 miles from England. By 1944, we were patrolling 1,000 miles from base and still had fuel to fight. The P-51 eliminated geography as a limiting factor in air warfare. We could go anywhere the Luftwaffe could go, stay longer, and fight harder when we got there. The strategic implications were devastating to German defensive planning. Training standards that produced P-51 pilots represented another American advantage that German systems could no longer match. By 1944, American flight training included 400 hours before assignment to combat units, with 75 hours specifically in advanced fighters. Pilots arrived in England understanding their aircraft systems intimately, capable of instrument flight, formation flying, air-to-air gunnery, and tactical procedures. German pilots, when available, reached combat units with less than 100 hours total experience and minimal training in combat procedures. The quality gap was so significant that veteran German pilots consistently reported their amazement at American pilot competence. The navigation technology available to P-51 pilots created situational awareness that German pilots could barely imagine. Each aircraft carried radio compass equipment, detailed charts, and predetermined navigation aids that allowed precise positioning, regardless of weather or visibility. Formation leaders received comprehensive briefings, including target coordinates, emergency procedures, and detailed intelligence about German defensive capabilities. This preparation level enabled complex missions involving hundreds of aircraft operating in coordinated formations across vast distances. German pilots, operating with limited radio equipment and outdated maps, often failed to locate their intended targets. Intelligence systems supporting P-51 operations provided advantages that multiplied their tactical effectiveness. Ultra-intercepts of German radio communications allowed Allied controllers to vector interceptors toward Luftwaffe formations before they reached their targets. Radar installations across southern England tracked every aircraft movement, providing early warning that made German surprise attacks impossible. Photo reconnaissance provided detailed information about German airfield activities, allowing P-51 formations to attack enemy aircraft on the ground when weather prevented aerial interception. This intelligence advantage was so complete that German formation leaders often found Allied fighters waiting at their intended destinations. The industrial infrastructure supporting P-51 production and operations represented American mobilization on a scale that German planners had dismissed as impossible. North American aviation employed 91,000 workers at peak production, more than the entire German aircraft industry workforce. These workers, including thousands of women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, achieved production rates and quality standards that exceeded anything German industry managed, even with slave labor. The Inglewood plant completed one P-51 every 45 minutes during peak production, including complete testing and quality control procedures that ensured reliability German aircraft couldn't match. Quality control procedures that guaranteed P-51 reliability represented another American innovation that German industry couldn't replicate. Each aircraft underwent comprehensive testing, including engine runs, flight testing, armament checks, and radio verification before delivery. Defects that German standards would have accepted resulted in aircraft rejection and return to production lines. This quality emphasis meant that P-51s achieved operational availability rates exceeding 85% compared to German rates below 60%. American pilots could depend on their aircraft functioning properly, while German pilots faced constant mechanical uncertainties. The logistical support structure that sustained P-51 operations dwarfed anything available to German units. Each fighter group received regular supply shipments, including spare engines, replacement parts, ammunition, fuel, and technical upgrades. Damaged aircraft that German units would abandon were repaired and returned to service using comprehensive spare parts inventories. Specialized maintenance equipment, including mobile cranes, precision tools, and testing apparatus, enabled field repairs that maintained operational strength. German units, operating with severely limited supplies, often cannibalized aircraft to keep a few examples operational. Medical support for P-51 pilots reflected American attention to human factors that German military culture largely ignored. Flight surgeons monitored pilot health, prescribed rest periods, and provided medical care that maintained combat effectiveness. Wounded pilots received immediate medical attention and comprehensive rehabilitation that returned them to duty when possible. Psychological support, virtually unknown in German units, helped pilots cope with combat stress and maintain performance. This comprehensive care contributed to pilot effectiveness and morale that German forces couldn't match with their harsh disciplinary systems. Colonel Don Blakesley, whose 4th Fighter Group had achieved legendary status flying both P-47s and P-51s, captured the transformation perfectly. The P-51 was more than a better airplane. It was a war-winning weapon system that included the pilot, the aircraft, the maintenance, the supply system, the intelligence, and the industrial base that produced it all. Germans had good pilots and adequate aircraft, but they couldn't match our total system approach to air warfare. That systematic superiority was what won the war in the air. The financial dimensions of American P-51 production revealed industrial capacity that made German efforts seem primitive by comparison. Each aircraft cost approximately $51,000 to produce, including armament and radio equipment. The total program expenditure exceeded $765 million, representing more than Germany's entire aircraft production budget for 1944. Yet this massive investment was easily absorbed by an American economy that had reached unprecedented productive capacity. Defense spending that would have bankrupted Germany was merely one element in American mobilization that produced more military equipment than all other nations combined. Test pilot operations that refined P-51 performance demonstrated American engineering capabilities that German industry could no longer match. North American aviation employed 47 test pilots who conducted over 15,000 hours of flight testing during P-51 development. Each variant underwent comprehensive evaluation, including performance testing, handling characteristics, armament effectiveness, and operational suitability. Modifications were implemented rapidly, with design changes flowing from combat reports to production lines within weeks. German aircraft development, hampered by fuel shortages and dispersed facilities, required months to implement changes that American engineers completed in days. The pilot training pipeline that produced P-51 pilots represented systematic investment in human resources that German training systems couldn't match. The United States graduated 193,440 pilots during the war, more than Germany trained throughout the entire conflict on all fronts. Each American pilot received comprehensive instruction, including primary training, basic flying, advanced flying, transition training, and combat tactics. The washout rate was 40%, ensuring that only qualified pilots reached operational units. German training, increasingly abbreviated due to fuel shortages and instructor losses, produced pilots with inadequate skills for survival against experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft. Navigation training that prepared P-51 pilots for long-range operations included instruction in dead reckoning, radio navigation, celestial navigation, and instrument procedures. Pilots learned to navigate over featureless terrain, through weather, and at night using techniques that German pilots had never mastered. This navigation competence enabled the complex long-range missions that characterized P-51 operations. Formation leaders could guide hundreds of aircraft across vast distances to precise rendezvous points, coordinate with bomber formations, and return to base regardless of weather conditions. Gunnery training that maximized P-51 combat effectiveness included extensive practice with both fixed and flexible gunnery ranges. Pilots learned deflection shooting, range estimation, ammunition conservation, and target identification. Camera guns recorded practice sessions for detailed analysis that identified individual weaknesses and recommended improvements. This systematic approach to marksmanship training produced pilots whose accuracy rates exceeded anything German training achieved. The effectiveness showed in combat results where American pilots consistently achieved higher kill-to-ammunition ratios than their German opponents. Formation flying instruction that enabled P-51 tactical effectiveness emphasized discipline, communication, and mutual support. Pilots learned to maintain position in various weather conditions, execute complex maneuvers, and provide overlapping protection during combat. The precision achieved through training allowed large formations to operate as coordinated units rather than collections of individual aircraft. German pilots, with limited training in formation procedures, often became separated during combat and fell victim to coordinated American attacks. The maintenance training programs that kept P-51s operational produced ground crews whose competence exceeded anything available to German units. Mechanics learned aircraft systems, engine operation, armament procedures, and troubleshooting techniques through comprehensive technical schools. The standardization of American aircraft meant that skills learned on one base transferred directly to other units, creating flexibility that German maintenance systems couldn't match. Ground crews could perform engine changes, major repairs, and modifications that kept aircraft operational under combat conditions. Weather forecasting services that supported P-51 operations provided information that enabled complex missions regardless of conditions. Meteorologists analyzed weather patterns across Europe, providing detailed forecasts that allowed mission planning 48 hours in advance. Radar installations tracked weather systems, providing real-time updates during missions. This meteorological support enabled operations during weather that grounded German forces completely, providing another dimension of American advantage. Photographic reconnaissance that supported P-51 missions provided intelligence about German activities that enabled tactical advantages. Specialized F-6 variants of the P-51, stripped of armament and carrying cameras, operated over German territory with virtual impunity. These aircraft photographed airfields, industrial targets, and defensive positions, providing current intelligence that enabled precise targeting and reduced casualties. German reconnaissance capabilities, severely limited by fuel shortages and aircraft losses, couldn't provide comparable intelligence about Allied activities. Air Sea rescue services that supported P-51 operations over water provided confidence that encouraged aggressive tactics. Specialized aircraft and surface vessels stood ready to rescue downed pilots from the English Channel and North Sea. Emergency procedures included survival equipment, rescue signals, and coordination with rescue services. This comprehensive rescue capability meant that pilots shot down over water had excellent survival chances, encouraging aggressive pursuit of German aircraft. German pilots, lacking comparable rescue services, operated with the knowledge that being shot down over water meant almost certain death. Technical intelligence that analyzed captured German aircraft provided insights that improved P-51 tactics and performance. Test flights of captured German fighters revealed performance characteristics, limitations, and vulnerabilities that informed combat procedures. Intelligence reports disseminated this information to operational units, ensuring that pilots understood enemy capabilities and could exploit weaknesses. This systematic approach to technical intelligence provided advantages that German forces, lacking access to captured Allied aircraft, couldn't match. The P-51 escort fighters that made D-Day air superiority possible had achieved something more significant than tactical victory. They had demonstrated that industrial democracy could outproduce and outfight totalitarian efficiency when fully mobilized. The Silver Mustangs flying over the invasion beaches on June 6, 1944, carried not just bombs and bullets, but the promise of liberation backed by industrial capacity that made Allied victory inevitable. The sky belonged to America, and with it, the fate of Europe was decided.